Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to this video series on the Introduction to Firewalls, Chapter 9. Just want to... So, configuring employees only and other specific rules. As an administrator, you can place restrictions on which particular users are allowed to access the internet by using specific protocols. Additionally, you can place restrictions on access during certain times of the day and to specific websites or content. The sections in this chapter walk you through the decisions of implementing these specific rules, limiting access by users. Sometimes network administrators want to restrict access to the internet to specific users on the network. In a perfect world, all the users that require access to the internet sit in the same part of the office and are on a dedicated subnet. In this scenario, you could configure firewall rules at the firewall to allow only users on that specific subnet to access the internet. In the real world, however, people who require identical internet access don't sit in the same section in the office. In fact, in larger organizations, they don't often even work in the same city. To restrict access to only specific users or groups, many of today's firewalls interact with your network operating system to restrict access to specific protocols or internet sites based on user identities or group memberships. Of course, in order for this interaction to happen, authentication must take place on the network so that the individual users can be identified. After users have been authenticated, the firewall uses their network identities to determine whether they have access to the requested protocol or site. If the user or groups to which the user belongs is allowed access, then the access will succeed. If the user or any other groups to which the user belongs is explicitly denied access to a protocol or site, then access will fail. Restricting access to protocols to specific users or groups enables a firewall administrator to further refine firewall rules by restricting who can use a protocol that is allowed to pass through the firewall. Adding authentication helps a firewall administrator to better implement firewall filters that reflect the true security policy of an organization. Figure 9.1 shows an example of how a Microsoft Internet Security and Acceleration ISA server protocol rule that we created named for web engineering is applied only to the engineering group. That this is not just an ISA server feature. Most firewalls interact with the network operating system to authenticate access to internet protocols. Filtering types of content. For cases in which an office may have low bandwidth availability, a company may want to restrict the types of content that can be downloaded from the internet. For example, if 50 people share a 64 kbps integrated services digital network ISDN connection, you may want to prevent users from downloading video content from the internet. Another possibility is to prevent questionable content from being downloaded. For example, a company may prevent the downloading of MP3 files to prevent the storage and distribution of illegally copied music on the corporate network. In this respect, filtering forms of content is not related to the actual information that is shown on a web page or in an internet application. Filtering content refers to the actual format of data that can be downloaded from the internet. For example, figure 9.2 shows an ISA server site and content rule setting that prevents the downloading of audio, video, and virtual reality modeling language, VRLM. This filter prevents users from downloading bandwidth-intensive content in order to preserve the limited available bandwidth on the connection to the internet. Filtering other content. What about the stuff that actually appears on the page. Up to this point in this chapter, we have talked about filtering based on the format of the content. In some cases, a company doesn't want its employees surfing for pornography, reading hate group websites, or using the internet or other content related reasons. What can you do to prevent access to these types of resources on the internet? You have two solutions. Prevent the use of uniform resource locators, URLs that are known to be undesirable web links. Implement content rating to prevent access to specific web content. A third possibility is to use a firewall that performs content inspection. Content inspection looks at the HTML content and searches for configured keywords and suppresses the display of such content. Generally, a mix of the first two solutions is used to prevent access to undesired content. Preventing access to known bad sites. Many websites are known to contain questionable content. For example, if you have children, you may want to prevent access to pornographic sites. You can use a couple of different strategies. URL blocking at the firewall. Many firewall products enable you to configure firewalls so that specific URLs are blocked. In any form of the URL is requested by a user, access to the internet resource is blocked, because creating your own list of bad sites and maintaining such a list can be an unimaginable chore. Take advantage of the software that automatically blocks certain types of websites and corresponding subscriptions to lists such as websites such as content filtering solutions are often implemented as add-on programs to existing firewalls. URL blocking at the client. Many browsers allow you to configure a list of sites that are blocked. Any attempt to connect to a URL included in the listing are prevented by the browser. Implementing content rating. What happens if you don't have the time, patience, or resolve to find all of the bad URLs on the internet? Have no fear. Content ratings here. Content rating applies. Content ratings defined by the Internet Content Rating Association, IRCA, formerly known as the Recreational Software Advisory Council on the Internet, RSACI, to all websites visited by a browser. As shown in Figure 3.9, the RSACI settings allow access to websites to be defined based on 4 categories of content: language, nudity, sex, violence. If the website is rated above the level defined in your browser, access is prevented. Likewise, you can also configure how your browser handles unrated sites. The configuration is pretty simple. You decide either to allow or block access to unrated sites. Setting the clock. Filtering on date time. The final configuration that you may want to use at your firewall is to limit access during specific times of the day. For example, you may want to prevent the playing of internet audio during the day due to bandwidth limitations, but allow access to the night shift. This configuration is accomplished by defining timeframes for a specific packet filter. For example, Figure 9.4 shows an ISA server site and content rule that is scheduled to be only active on weekdays outside of regular work hours. If someone attempts to use the protocol defined in the site and content rule during the inactive hours, access is prevented. On the other hand, if access is attempted during the active hours, it is granted. Using time-based rules allows a company to lessen internet restrictions after business hours while ensuring that only approved internet usage takes place during business hours. So I'm going to leave it here today for this video. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing and subscribing. Thank you.